Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the She's Got GAWL podcast, brought to you by the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. I am Ebony Phillips, your host, and I am thrilled to have you with us tonight. I think you're going to be really, if I can say that 10 times fast, but I think you're going to be really glad you tuned in. We are in the continuation of our Imposter Series syndrome, and we're calling it Who Do You Think You Are? Exploring and Combating the Imposter Syndrome Series. And we have the good fortune of having Dr. Ericka Goodwin with us tonight. And Dr. Ericka is on a mission. She's on a mission to help you be better, do better, and live better. She is a Harvard-trained, double board certified psychiatrist. She's a best-selling author. She's a top-rated speaker. She's a life coach. She's all the things that we need to figure out what this imposter syndrome is and how we get through it, right? So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ericka.
Well, thank you. I mean, I feel like I need to just do a happy dance after that wonderful introduction. So
Thank
true.
You. Every word is
here.
true. Every word is true. We were, just to give a little bit of context to our listeners, we were kind of talking about this on our last episode. And when we talked about it last time in our part one, we kind of talked about exactly what the imposter syndrome is. We had some professional women on who were kind of talking about their experience with it. Dr. Ericka gave us some exciting tips. And I say exciting because a lot of times when you get tips from people, you're like, yeah, but who can really do that? But these tips are exciting because they're doable. Like you could start them like the minute you hear them, they're so doable. So please, if you haven't already, go back and listen to part one, and that'll kind of catch you up. But the good news is you don't have to have already listened or viewed part one for this episode to make sense for you. So go back and watch and listen at your leisure. Dr. Ericka, I want to just ask you, we talked about obviously the definition of imposter syndrome last time. I want to go back through that really briefly to kind of guide the conversation we're having tonight. I think where we're going to end up probably is talking about the 4 P's of the imposter syndrome. And a lot of the professional women listening probably can relate. I mean, those are, perfectionism, paralysis, procrastination, and then also people pleasing. Especially for women, I think the people pleasing definitely will come in. But before we get to that part, and before I bring in our other guests in the conversation, I wanted you to just overview really quickly for our listeners, for our audience, what is the imposter syndrome? What is that really? Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's writing about, like, what is it? Is it a thing? Is it a real thing, Dr. Ericka?
Not only is it a real thing, we'll just say the term came from 2 psychologists. So they have PhDs. So we'll say it has to be official. So one of my favorite definitions for imposter syndrome is it is the persistent inability to believe that one's success is deserved or has been legitimately achieved as a result of their own efforts or skills. So that's probably my favorite, but I'm glad we actually did a definition because I feel like imposter syndrome is one of those things we talk about so much that sometimes you assume it's the definition, but nobody really will say what it is. But to me, the key parts is that it's persistent. So this is a repetitive behavior or repetitive thought pattern. And that no matter how great you are, you're unable to accept it.
That's a mouthful, Dr. Ericka. No matter how great you are, you're unable to accept it. And I'm not going to say that I fully understand it, but I can find that in my own life, it's relatable in a number of ways. And before we go further into this, I want to just call out the 4 P's again, because if somebody's taking notes, we do have a doctor on. It's good to take notes when the doctor speaks. We're going to be talking about perfectionism, paralysis, procrastination, and of course, people pleasing. And I want to ask you, Dr. Ericka, because honestly, if this is a safe space, right? That perfectionism hit me like a ton of bricks. It hit me over the head like a boulder, because as professionals, we take a lot of assessments, a lot of, all of the things that people say are personality analyzers and all of that kind of stuff. And I've taken a ton of them. And it seems like no matter which one I take or what company puts it out, perfectionism is in there some kind of way. And so I thought, well, maybe there's something to that. Maybe they're not really making that up. Maybe I should pay attention to it. And so I started to try to do some self work around that. But then I was like, OMG, it could show up as part of the imposter syndrome too. And what I mean by perfectionism, and I don't even know if this is exact, and you'll explain it to us, like perfectionism to the point of triple and quadruple checking everything you do. And I got thinking one day, like maybe a double check is probably good enough. Because if I triple and quadruple check everything I do over the course of a whole lifetime, I've given away so much time, and really time is the one thing that we can't replenish. And I don't even know if I'm on track with what this means, perfectionism concept means with the imposter syndrome. That's just kind of how it spoke to me. So when we're talking about the imposter syndrome and perfectionism, Dr. Ericka, what is that? What's the correlation between those two things, and how does it really tend to show up?
The first thing is, I need to affirm you did know what you were talking about.
That's good news.
So yes, you did
Thank
well. You did well.
Thank you for that.
Oh, no problem. I think one of the reasons it's great to have these kinds of conversations and what the 4Ps are is the fact that all of us on this podcast are in professions that select out for us to have all these issues.
Yeah.
That the environments and the culture of law and medicine are one that it's a culture that rewards perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a culture that a lot of people have had just an outrageous amount of times people told them they couldn't do it.
Right.
So what are you going to do when people keep telling you can't do something and you are working to do it? You're going to work harder, more, and hold yourself to a standard and feel a lot of times like you can't meet it. So I agree with you. The perfectionism end is one of the biggest things about it is the reason why. And I think that's what's going to separate some of these issues out or some of these behavior and thought patterns from other constellations of where they appear is the why.
Mm.
So the why behind the perfectionism in the 4Ps with imposter syndrome, that why is you feel like you have to be perfect. The standard is high. The standard is perfection, partially because you feel like you have to be perfect to show that you are worthy.
Perfect to show that you are worthy. Ouch.
But you also mentioned the big thing about it is what does that perfectionism do? Time. All the time you spend doing stuff over and over again or to a level that was 100% not necessary, along with the anxiety around the actual perfectionism. It's stressful.
It is. It's incredibly stressful. It's incredibly stressful. So we were talking from before about the numbers and percentages of women who are confronted with the imposter syndrome. And I know that I think some numbers put it as high as 70%, some as high as 80%. Is that a societal thing where women feel like they have to be perfect in order to be validated? Is it a societal thing? Is it an internal thing? Is that something that comes in your DNA?
Can I say all of the things?
All the things. Yes, all the
It's all
things.
of that, because you're going to be impacted by your environment, your interpersonal relationships, how you were raised, then beyond how you're raised, how you are dealing with the social and cultural norms of society, along with your own personal experiences. So, and then there are also certain other things that can make people a little bit more prone that could technically be in your DNA, but it's probably more transmission of trauma. Because if you look at a lot of these responses that you see are coming up for imposter syndrome, they also can be trauma responses.
So we have with us tonight two women who I know that are ahead of the game in their professional and personal lives, and I can vouch for them personally. Not that my seal of approval means a doggone thing, but just stating a fact. I know them and they're awesome. We have Lauryn Wallace with us, who's an attorney. And Lauryn is the type of attorney and person who basically wants to help, wants to leave things better than she found them. She is from Paducah, Kentucky, and she moved to Atlanta with her husband and graduated from John Marshall Law School in 2011. And she has had amazing track record since that time. She's been in the solicitor's office for a major metropolitan county, worked in the DA's office, was recruited to come to that office just based on the skill sets that she had displayed previously. And now she leads a whole unit in another district attorney's office. And I'm saying all that to say, Lauryn, have you had any experience with the imposter syndrome?
All the time. Hi guys. Hi, Ebony. Thank you for those kind words also. Yes, I've gotten better about it in more recent years when I started recognizing what was going on. But during those years when you're trying to, develop yourself, develop your career, and those were probably the darkest times, I'll say, when I was struggling with feeling good enough. Am I supposed to, is this the track I'm supposed to be on? What are other people going to think and say about me? Are they going to think that I don't deserve this, or don't deserve to be here, or I'm not good enough? Or yes, years and years of imposter syndrome, but thank goodness I can identify it now.
What about this perfectionism piece that we're talking about? Are you able to identify with that at all?
I have always identified as a perfectionist. I think I'm probably, of the 4 Ps, I probably identify though with procrastination and paralysis the most, and then probably third is perfectionism.
Okay.
But because I want to be perceived as always doing the right thing, always right and correct and perfect, I think that tends to bleed into the procrastination and the paralysis.
Now, you said that you recognized it some years ago.
Yes.
What drew your attention to it, though? If you had always lived your life that way, what was that moment for you where you're like, wait a minute, this is definitely probably imposter syndrome, even if you didn't call it that or didn't know what to call it, but just recognizing those tendencies in yourself? What was going on in that space, in that time?
I think I had recognized the tendencies, but didn't have the word imposter syndrome until I read Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. And she talks about in the imposter syndrome in that book. And, she's a female CEO of several major companies that she has been. And so if she's doing that, I think that's really telling, that someone who you can objectively say has achieved a lot in their career also suffers from imposter syndrome. And then I recognize that in myself with, the 4 Ps that we're discussing.
So we have the pleasure of having another Lauryn on this episode, Lauryn Morris. And Lauryn is a 2L at Emory Law School. She's from Prince George's County, Maryland, and before she came to law school, she received her bachelor's in psychology from Howard University and has worked as a crisis counselor for the National Suicide Prevention Line. The other thing that I'll say about Lauryn is that she wrote on the Emory Law Journal as a staff editor and has been a teaching and research assistant for 1L contracts classes. And she is the newly appointed regional director of the pre-law student division for the Southern region of the Black Law Students Association. She is also the outgoing president of the Emory University Law School chapter of the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. And that's a lot. And I don't say that half-heartedly. It's a lot. She's done a lot. She's continuing to do a lot. Lauryn is one of those people, Lauryn Morris is one of those people, much like I described Lauryn Wallace, who is in it for being about the right thing and leaving things better than when they found them. And so they end up being in a lot of different spaces, doing a lot of heavy lifts, some lifts that, some people are too faint at heart to do. And Lauryn has pushed the Emory Law School chapter of the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers forward in some major, major ways. And, when you're a law student and you're chosen to be on the board of a professional statewide organization, that's a big deal. Now, Lauryn is probably never going to say that, so I'm going to say it for her. That's a big deal. But I wonder, Lauryn, because I remember my law school years and I remember being terrified of failing. I remember having serious notions around quitting law school, actually, and all the things. Have you had experience with all that you've done, all that you've accomplished, all that you've achieved with the imposter syndrome?
Yes, and I'll say first that I actually had imposter syndrome 10 minutes before being on this call. Am I qualified for this? But I'm so grateful just for the opportunity because I get to talk about my experiences. I wasn't sure that I could say I definitely have experienced imposter syndrome. And so I think that goes to what Lauryn mentioned about sometimes you just don't recognize it. And so I'm glad to know that later in my career, maybe I will develop better practices about really narrowing in and dealing with the problem. I grew up in a predominantly Black community, right? A predominantly Black community and I went to school at Howard University in HBCU. And so not only am I a woman, but Emory Law was the first time that I have experienced being a minority in any educational setting. And I don't take that lightly, but also being that I've never felt different, I said, why am I going to feel that way now? And so I've chucked up a lot of my feelings toward law school to just being a law student. Like I have questioned, yes, my aptitude, or I've questioned whether I belong or I deserve to be in the space, but I thought that maybe that's just the law student feeling. And I realized after researching imposter syndrome and looking at things such as overworking yourself to prove yourself or not really feeling the success internally, but also being a high achieving person. And I have cued in on some of the practices that I've developed since being in law school that just have imposter syndrome written all over it. I mean, just speaking of that contracts class, which I had the experience of being a TA for, in that class, just first year of law school in general, I remember getting up at least arriving at school 2 to 3 hours earlier than my first class, and my first class started at 8:30. And I convinced myself that I'm a morning person. I just like mornings, and that's what I do because I'm a morning person. And I don't think I'm a morning person, but I think that I was trying to just feel like I belonged and that I was working hard enough, and I couldn't do that unless I got there early. I used every weekend that I had to do work, whether it was, I didn't do it in the law school library because you can hear a pin drop in there and it's so stressful. But I would go to a coffee shop and I would say, I enjoy this. There are people, they're having coffee and I got my iPad out, or I would go anywhere and just bring my iPad or bring my laptop. And when it came time to take my first semester contracts midterm, I had gotten the highest score on the midterm and still just did not think that. I said, there's no way. This was only practice. There's no one out, no one took this seriously. And my professor looked at me, and she's a Black woman. And so I just seeing her, like, I wanted her to be proud of me. But I thought, this is a fluke. This is phony. This is fake. I think in that moment she looked at me to show me that she was proud, but I looked away. I looked away because I said, there's no way. Now I have to do, when the final comes along and she realizes that this was all fake, what do I do then? And I think that I think that was sort of not a textbook definition, but definitely an example of imposter syndrome. Because even after that, I felt like I needed to work harder.
You couldn't accept it. You couldn't even accept her accolades.
Yes.
That's a great example, Lauryn, because when Dr. Ericka gave us the definition of imposter syndrome, she said it's persistent, right? It's the persistent inability to accept that you're where you're supposed to be and that you've earned to be there. And anybody who is going to class or 2 or 3 hours early and studying around the clock has earned, I mean, that's putting in work, but you still kind of, it sounds like, felt like it just wasn't enough. And I think we are part of professions that sort of lend themselves to that, right? It's always like, if I'm not studying, the next person is studying 5 minutes more than me, and so I'm going to fall behind. Or if I'm, taking a day off and the other person isn't taking a day off, then I'm not going to be able to keep up. And it just kind of feeds into your psyche. And if you're not careful, you'll get trapped in it. I know Madison Tucker, who is our UGA president, was sharing that now at UGA Law School, they sort of talk to them about all those things as they're coming in. And I didn't have that when I went to law school. When it started, like, nobody was saying to me, you belong to be here. You're, other than your parents, right? But you expect that from your parents. So sometimes you're looking for external validation because your parents are supposed to say that, right? But we didn't have any of that. We had just a very competitive experience, and it was competitive from the word go. But Dr. Ericka, I wonder, we were talking about perfectionism, but I'm wondering also, like, does that lead into this notion of the other P, of paralysis, in a way? At some point, can you try so hard that you paralyze yourself? I don't know. It just feels like at some point there has to be a breaking point, which might not be good, but you reach a breaking point.
Well, the first thing is, you all have me all in my feelings. I was sitting here listening to you all and listening to the Lauryns, and I was literally sitting there thinking, when was I actually affirmed by anybody in medical school that was faculty? I literally can't remember.
Wow.
I was there for 4 years, and I literally don't have strong memories of being affirmed or told I was doing what I was meant to do, or told I was doing something well. I literally can't remember a single instance. I assume it must have happened once or twice, but for 4 years, I know I went to school a while ago, but I literally was sitting here like, I don't remember that being part of my experience at all.
Wow.
Like, at all. Like, I'm a little befuddled. Y'all have me in my feelings. I really just am sitting here thinking, I had no idea. But back to the question.
I think they tried to scare us more than they definitely weren't trying to affirm us. I think they enjoyed, maybe that's a little too strong, but I think they enjoyed trying to, make us feel intimidated and scare us and see who were going to be the strong ones and, who were going to be the ones that dropped out.
Well, and I know for us, it's such a critical environment. It's super critical. And then one of the ways I think a lot of this shows up, and I'm sure we'll get to transitioning, talking about what some of the risk factors or situations that tend to encourage this, is when I became an attending and supervised residents and fellows and saw just the difference of residents and fellows that felt comfortable being a free thinker and felt comfortable speaking whatever they were thinking without having all the mental gymnastics around, is this right? Am I saying the right thing? What will someone think if I say it? Also known as white males. That it was just a totally different experience of seeing how they perceive all of these spaces, which is why I'm not shocked that, the imposter syndrome was first described in women, because it's all this stuff we all carry with us that makes it even harder. But back to your question, part of the reason I think a lot of these they feel very connected is they're different sides of the same, I'd say coin, but coins only have two sides. Yes. And part of it is because there are ways that people will break these out into fight, flight, and freeze. And then there's like, and one,
Mhm.
and it's not surprising because ironically, a lot of these function similar as trauma responses. Is that you had the perfectionism is a lot of action. It's thought behind it, but it's a lot of action. It makes you think of the little mouse that's doing
Right.
all of this, trying to do everything. And then when you're trying to do all the things and you can't seem to find a way to make it work, and it's so much that you just stop, then that's the freeze, that's the paralysis. And they looked at the flight actually being procrastination, because in procrastination, you're not actually frozen or doing nothing, but you're doing all these other things instead of what you feel was actually the priority, because and it's a lot that why behind it is either you're so stuck in all these other things that you can't get to it, or you're procrastinating because there's so much fear of failure behind it that it gets so overwhelming that you can't tackle it.
So you mentioned procrastination. What about this people pleasing?
Well, that's the and one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things that, number one, it's not surprising, especially since they originally described this in women, even though it is not gender specific, is that as women, I feel like we are all taught to be a people pleaser from the second we take a couple steps and have sentences.
Mhm.
That given the societal context, that we're all the definition and the cultural norm of being female is an identity of being a caregiver, and being not just a caregiver, but a caregiver that puts everyone's needs ahead of yourself in any situation. So it's not a surprise that people pleasing comes up, because people pleasing is also another way to look at trying to get external validation.
External validation. That makes me, for some reason, think a lot about social media. And I wonder if there's any connection between this external validation seeking social media and then the prevalence of the imposter syndrome. Is that connected at all?
I would have to look to see if anybody has studied that. I'm not sure if they have studied it, especially because there's so much overlap that I feel like it would be difficult to truly do a controlled study, given that there is so much cognitive distortion and people pleasing, just in the nature of social media, with trying to, I wouldn't say it's all people pleasing, but looking for that external validation, that I think it would be very difficult to do a study that could really separate those things out of what's naturally with social media versus it being something else.
I know I can really only speak to my experience, but I think we've all been people pleasers and experienced, imposter syndrome with the procrastination and what's the other ones? And paralysis. I've been doing that my whole life, and I'm old enough to know a time before social media. So I think, social media is a great way to get some external validation, or the opposite of, but I don't know that it would, I don't think it's really a cause of or contributor to imposter syndrome, but that's just through my own experience and opinion. I don't know what the statistics would be.
I think that's a great point. But now that we kind of have a name for it and we can see how it shows up in certain settings, and I don't necessarily even want to limit this conversation to our professional lives, because we're all about helping and helping all around. And I'm curious for the Lauryns, and I'll go to Lauryn Morris first. Have you seen the imposter syndrome show up in your personal life? I know you talked about your law school experience and all of that, but just personally have you seen it show up?
I think that it has shown up among my friends, and I think I want to mention not just the friends that I've developed since being in law school, but the friends that I've had before law school. We are all in such different stages of our lives where our priorities look different. Some of us are in grad schools or starting families or just doing anything on that sort of spectrum. And when we come together, I think that that sometimes, depending on what it is that you decided to do after high school or after college, that it becomes harder to maintain the relationships where you want everyone to feel like we're all the same people, but we're not. And then you have a case where this person has had all of these major successes. Do you still fit in with that group?
Right. I think that's a good point, because evolution of life, career, whatever it is, it's somebody said everybody that you start with isn't who you're going to end with, right? And that's on different parts of the journey. But when you find those situations, what do you do? Like, how do you just kind of confront that, or do you confront it? I mean, I guess the way I phrase the question is kind of presumptuous. Maybe you don't confront it.
Actually, I think that even with a lot of my friends, for example, are doing really amazing things in their fields. And I think that sometimes I believe that comparison just is the thief of joy. And so I really try not to compare, but sometimes you need to let them know that what they're doing is so amazing, and look where you were. And so it might not be a comparison laterally amongst people like in the same group or our peers, but it's who you were last year. And that in itself is like, just, those are major accomplishments. I mean, I have people who have friends who are corporate in consulting or beauty or have created businesses, and these are all very different accolades, but they're all amazing accolades. And I think that sometimes with higher education, that the medical school or the law school looks bigger. And it's not necessarily, right? It's not. It's a different success.
Right. I think that's a good point regarding the lateral versus the vertical comparisons. I mean, I do some work with drug court, mental health court, and those challenges that people have to overcome in that sphere are tremendous. And so we were in a setting with some mental health participants a couple weeks ago, and she was conversing with the judge, and the judge said that, "Oh my gosh, you look so bright today. You're just glowing. What's going on with you?" And she said, "I've just come to a very important realization." And the judge was like, "Okay." And she kind of leaned into her, like, "Do you want to share it with the group? Because you are really glowing." And she said, "I finally now realize," and this is in mental health court, right? That the only person I have to compete with is the person that I was yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my, that is like t-shirt worthy, coffee mug worthy, all the things. And I think it's just a different way of stating what you just stated about the lateral versus the vertical comparisons. But it's funny because of how society is, and Dr. Ericka hit on that a minute ago, and just sort of particularly how women are poised to be the end all be all caretaker of all the things. Sometimes it takes us what feels like a lifetime to really come to that moment, right? And so I feel like if we can start normalizing these conversations, then maybe the next generation of women doesn't have to get well into their 40s or 50s before they reach that point. Because Dr. Ericka, you hit on something earlier about sort of what this kind of imposter syndrome tendencies lead to. I heard you say anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, if the centerpiece of everything is not feeling good enough and perpetually trying to take action to be good enough, that is stressful. That is anxiety producing. it's just a horrible feeling. And then people that are going through this repetitively, it's just not sustainable over the long term. I'm not surprised that so many people are burning out, that this can lead to burnout, but also people can end up depressed because they feel so either unsuccessful, or no matter what they do, things don't get better. It's just rough. So you can see all these different things that kind of build with these situations, which is why it's so important to have these conversations and to have them in safe ways where people are actually affirming each other and talking about their experiences, so that as Lauryn mentioned, is that so that younger people and other people can start recognizing these things sooner, so that you don't end up with all this anxiety, this depression, this burnout, it impacting your interpersonal relationships because you're so stressed out and never feel good enough. And then you look up and your friendships are janky, or you can't hold a romantic relationship, or you're getting divorced because you just feel so bad all the time about yourself. And at the end of the day, a lot of this is about just having a better quality of life. And if I had to say what I want for everyone listening, is part of the reason I'm big on be better, do better, and live better, so that you have that optimal quality of life. Because as Ebony said, you don't get the time back.
So, Dr. Ericka, I want to know, because I'm a hard worker, my two Lauryns are hard workers, our audience are hard workers. Where's the line? Like, where's the line where hard work bleeds over into the imposter syndrome? Like, when do we know, okay, this is hard work versus you've gone too far, you need to pull back, you've gone too far, you need to talk to a professional, you've gone too far, you need to get with your circle of friends and get reaffirmed. Like, how will we know? Because we're trained to work hard, and I don't know, and I know you're not saying that there's anything wrong with hard work, but I just want the audience to be clear, like, there comes a point where we've gone too far. Where's the bridge too far?
You asked about 5 questions.
I tend to do that.
Feel like I went to court earlier. I feel like I'm in court now.
I'm so sorry.
No, I'm playing with you. I am playing with you. There are a couple of different questions in there, and I'm going to try to break them down very quickly. The first one is, when is working too hard feeling like you cross the line and it's too much? I'd say there are 2 things to look for in that situation. One is, why are you working hard? What is the goal? So I think we're back to the why. The second is, does it feel good to you? I think we've all had times where we worked hard. We knew there was a time limit. It was a project, and it finished, and we're like, yeah, you're like, I passed the bar. I got a great job. I got elected to GAWL president. And you worked hard for a goal, and then it's like, okay, great, it feels good. I think the thing is looking at when you're working hard, and working hard feels bad. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel tolerable. You just feel done and toast, or that you don't know why you're doing this anymore. So I feel like that's one of the nuggets to look for. Mm-hmm. The next, as far as when to seek support from your people, because there was a question, there's 2 levels of support. One is like people that love you. So that can be friends, that can be your family, and some people even have colleagues that they have that kind of relationship with. And I'd say reach to them before you feel like terrible. Is that if you're just feeling like, no matter, I'm working hard, no matter what I do, it's just not working. And that's why I always say one of the things to do is phone a friend, which is have someone tell you how great you are and remind you all the great things you did, and all of those things that you forget, or you'll say, no, but yeah, I may have had that award, but I didn't do such and such, or I still want to do this. So, I want to be you wouldn't be surgeon. I want to be attorney general. So being a DA ain't good enough. I didn't make it yet. So it's having those people just to remind you. And it's almost the equivalent of having people be able to read your CV back to you sometimes, to remind you of all these things you've done that you've forgotten you've done because you're so busy feeling like you haven't done enough. When to seek professional help. When has it gone too far? That's a two-parter too. So part one is you can use us before it gets bad. We're a safe space. It's literally our job to just sit and listen to you. And right now, a lot of times people don't always have the bandwidth to hold space for you. And the thing is, if you come and talk to one of us, well, you don't have to worry about our judgment. You don't have to worry about how is this going to affect your job? How's this going to affect your relationship? Is who you're talking to too stressed? Do your problems seem too little next to theirs? So I'd say you don't have to be able to really identify much of a problem to see one of us, because we're just good for health maintenance. But if it's an issue of when is the line, if I'm not just using someone for stress management, is that if you just start feeling icky, if you don't feel like yourself, if you feel like you're like, my mother has a saying, hustling backwards. If it seems like no matter what you do and you're like the little doggy paddling and you're just going, or be like ducks in the pond.
The duck.
They're doing all of this and they're going backwards.
Right.
If you feel like all of this hard work, you're doing all this hard work, you're doing all these things and you don't feel good about it, you don't feel like you're getting where you need to be, and you feel like this isn't sustainable, then it's a great time, because the best thing to do is to get help before it gets super big, because a lot of what we end up doing is boundary work. Because to me, when you look at what's one of the biggest solutions is boundaries.
Sorry if I'd like to jump in and just share my personal experience, because literally everything that she has said, I think I have experienced. So, and I'm not a very private person. I'm a talker. Like, it's killing me not to talk every 2 seconds, but but I experience anxiety and depression. I'm on medication for anxiety and depression, but I didn't get, obviously there were periods of time in my life where I didn't really realize what was going on. And so then I would schedule an appointment with a counselor, and it took me a while to find the right counselor. I think I probably went through, 5 to 10 counselors throughout my life until I found one that I felt like was helpful and understood what I was dealing with. But when I started in a job, in a position that I didn't feel good enough for, I had come from a job and a position that I was in that I felt extremely comfortable in and felt like I was succeeding in that position. And then I moved to another position, and the imposter syndrome set in. I was worried about, am I going to, now that I'm doing something new, am I going to be good enough compared to, how good I was in the past? And I'm trying to speak vaguely, and I don't know if I'm just ending up being more confusing, but so I had all the thoughts of, I'm not good enough. Other people are going to think I'm not good enough. And so that kind of sent me in a spiral mentally, to the point where I would experience the procrastination and the a little bit of people pleasing, but mostly the paralysis too. And I think that's because the anxiety set in, the anxiety and depression set in. And so that would leave me just feeling like there were times where I physically could not move. Like I cannot get out of bed. And it would just build up, that mental headspace, and those feelings would just build up. And so, but I think I started seeing a therapist when my friends and people close to me started, noticing a difference in my behavior and my attitude. And I just wasn't really the same person that I usually am. And also supervisors, I would start hearing things like, that I was too meek or mild or, not confident enough. And I'm like, do you know me? Because that is so not me at all. And so when you start getting feedback like that, then you know something's up and you need to seek some therapy and professional help in order to work through those thoughts and feelings that you're experiencing.
I thank you so much for sharing that, Lauryn. That was a great thumbnail to what Dr. Ericka had just previously shared in her comments. And that's a perfect example. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have the conversation, is because we want to normalize being proactive around our well-being, right? We don't want to always, wait until something goes terribly wrong, but just kind of have it on deck like we do our annual PCP visits. And there are certain, like for your physical health, there are certain things you do every year, whether there's something wrong or not. There are certain checkups you get, certain parts of your body you check out, regardless of whether you think something has gone off kilter. And I feel like we need to be more in line with that for our mental and emotional well-being. I really, really do. And so I'm encouraging people. I'm going to say, she didn't tell me to say this, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say, reach out to Dr. Ericka. If you feel like you need to talk to somebody. I know that she always is holding a safe space for people. And she is at the top of her field. She's definitely well trained, but more importantly, she is well intentioned. And it's not just a job for her. She really does care about people. And as Lauryn Wallace mentioned, sometimes it takes you 2, 3, 4, 5 times to get to the right person. And so if you can get to the right person sooner, obviously you can be on the track to doing your self-work sooner. I thank you ladies so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to give Dr. Ericka the last word, because I'm sure there's something else she might want to share. Not a question that I would ask necessarily, but something around this topic or mental or well-being in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the imposter syndrome, that you feel like you want to share with our audience before I sign us off, because I know that there are a lot of things that we think we might need to know, but we're not the professional. You are. So if there's anything that you want to share as a last word, we'd love to have it.
Well, I have a few last words. One is, this has been such a wonderful experience. All of you all are such wonderful people that I feel really honored.
Thank you.
Especially after the day I've had. I'm like,
thank you for coming on after the day you've had. We appreciate
yes,
you.
We appreciate you.
I mean, it's part of doing this work, and I'm very blessed to be able to do something for a vocation that feels like it makes a difference. And I feel like that makes the hard work I do feel like it makes sense, because it feels so purpose driven. But if I had to leave people with one thing, the one thing I would say is, you are the expert in you. And even though people are going to, over the course of your education and career, actually beat you down a little bit, that I want you to still feel comfortable and tap back into your intuition. And if you feel like something's not right, or you're not feeling well, or that you're just so fatigued, listen to yourself, listen to your body, and come see one of us. I mean, because one of the reasons I think a lot of the work we do as mental health professionals is important is, as we were talking about earlier in this conversation, is a lot of these different things don't happen. They all have different names, but they usually don't happen on an island, so it's not someone has imposter syndrome, but nothing else is going on, or someone has trauma and nothing else is going on, or someone's had depression and nothing else is going on. For a lot of people, there are just so many capacity issues at this point. It could be multifactorial. But one of the things that we do is, I also believe in coaching. But the thing is there are times people hit blocks in coaching, or even blocks in their professional lives, that there's something else underneath it that needs to be taken care of for you to be able to make it to that next level. But I want you to make it and feel good. I want you to feel good about where you are. So I just really appreciate that. And I have a new website, so check out goodwinmed.com. I'm living my life over there while I'm podcasting too, but that's better with Dr. Ericka, but my practice is goodwinmed.com. So there's a brand new website. But I just want to say I encourage all of you to remember how much it means for you to be on this earth and how much you deserve to have a good experience as a human.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ericka Goodwin. I appreciate both of the Lauryns coming by, Lauryn Morris, Lauryn Wallace. You ladies are amazing. Thank you for doing this. I know it requires a bit of transparency on your part, and so it's much appreciated. This has been the part 2 of the series, Who Do You Think You Are? Exploring and Combating the Imposter Syndrome with Dr. Ericka Goodwin and guests. This is a production of the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. We would love to have you join us. We would love. That's 3 loves. So you got to click on GAWL.org. That's GAWL.org. And we're spelling it GAWL.org. And if you're not ready to join, just go on the website and see what we're all about. Our mission is to support women in the legal profession, women in the community, and also children. Until next time, I'm going to say, as Dr. Ericka would say, explore the why. Get to the heart of the why. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.